Welcome back to the channel. This is Roberto Full Curl Precision again. And for the guy who complained about my beard, that close enough? Huh? Yeah. Yeah, somebody apparently had an issue with the fact that I was this close to the camera and he could see my beard hair. Get out of here. If that's the thing you're gonna pick on, you need help. You could have called in to question any of the data I said, anything, my perspective, my opinion, things. My beard hair? Really? Okay, whatever. So, what other body parts would you rather see? Not that I'm going to show any, but really, this is offensive. Anyway, all right, back to some what we're talking about tonight. For tonight, we're doing a little comparison between the 308 Winchester and the 270 Winchester, and this has nothing to do with knocking one over the other. They have their pros and cons. For those who love their short actions, the 308 is a great option. For those who are more my way of thinking, I'm not concerned about the length of the action. That's irrelevant to me. So what I am doing is just explaining my mindset. So both cartridges are phenomenal for your average hunter. And your average hunter here in North America hunts predominantly white-tailed deer. That's by far the largest population of hunters hunt white-tailed deer, and understandable. There's tons of whitetail. That they cover basically virtually every square inch of North America. Not in the literal sense, but for the most part, they're there. And then you get a lot of other medium game that are going to be involved in this. So we're going to throw in the pronghorn, which about max I've heard some guys talk about a good buck, maybe 150 pounds. Like, they don't get tremendously big. You got desert whitetail, known as a Coues deer. You have mule deer. On the west coast, you get there's a couple of subspecies of blacktail, like the Columbia blacktail and the Sitka blacktails, and they go up and down the coast. And then you're gonna have your bighorn sheep and your mountain goats. And there's desert sheep and so on and so forth. And we'll even throw in on the large end of medium game, where they're kind of a border animal, like smaller end of large game, larger end of small game. You're gonna have like your reindeer and caribou. And for those who are wondering, reindeer and caribou are literally the same animal, just different locations call them differently. So here in North America, we call them caribou. And then over in Europe, they're oftentimes referred to as reindeer. Nothing wrong with that. The same animal, just so that way if anybody asks, that's what we're talking about. These are part of the world of medium game. And if you're over in other parts of the world, we're going to include axis, fallow, there's just a whole slew. And then you can take it over into Africa, and there's a wide variety of plains game that are medium range. Like lechwe, impala, so on and so forth. There's a lot of antelope over in Africa that are medium game. They maybe get 200, 250 pounds. That's about it. So, common cartridges all over the world. Part of those two, you have 308 and you have 270 Winchester. And so for myself, all I'm doing is explaining why I choose the 270, especially for where we live over in southwest Montana. And my starting with the 270 started before we moved out here. But either way, out here, going back to more open terrain, I wanted to explain my mindset and where I'm going with this. So I'm going to show you some of the numbers. I'm only going to show you some of the numbers off the 308, off of GRT, and then we're going to go into the ballistics calculator. But I have a reason why I like the 270 over the 308, and I'm gonna show it to you. So here's a couple parameters before we start. Number one, identical barrel length, so 24 inches. because that's, a very common barrel length. And then the other aspect is we're going to keep the same range. So we're talking about out to 500 yards. And we're going to be also using the same weight bullets because there isn't a big overlap in weights that the 30 calibers and the 27 calibers do. But 150 grain bullet is one of them. And so while they're not exact, these do come from the same manufacturer, that of Nosler. So for me, I'm hunting with it and shooting a 150 grain Nosler AccuBond long range out of my 270. A 150 grain Nosler AccuBond is a very common bullet, but they are the same weight, and the AccuBonds have a little bit better BC than a lot of other 150 grains and 30 caliber. So I'm trying to make it as fair of a comparison as I can. But again, I'm just explaining my vantage point. I'm not trying to tell you how to feel or anything like that. If you have a reason why you like the 308 over the 270, perfect. I'd love to hear it in the comments. But at the same time, I'm just speaking for myself, so don't take it like I'm trying to knock your favorite. That's not this at all. So let me turn the camera around and we'll get this going. So here we go. You got 308 Winchester, 150 grain Nosler AccuBond. The BC is .435. And I did a video on it last night or the night prior, talking about, do you need to be so worried about the BC? And the answer is no. That's a pretty decent BC for everything you're going to do within 400 to 500 yards. It's going to take care of your needs quite nicely. So don't get so caught up in BC that you overlook a good, accurate option. And I went through and I optimized powders in this as best as I could, pushed it up a little bit to 62,000. So I'm giving it a little bit more than, here we go. Come back. Than, what your typical loads are going to be. So I'm using Vihtavuori N540, and I pushed it, pretty far up there. That highlighted line right there, you can see it's right below that line. And it's less than 61,000 PSI. But here's what I like about it. So I went with, again, I'm pushing it, here's your load ratio of 102.4%. So it's not like crazy overloaded. Burn propellant, 100%. So it's doing pretty good. So it's giving you, why did that switch up? All right, hold on. There we go. 47.4 grains of the N540, pushing it out of a 24-inch barrel. You're getting over 2,900 feet per second. And that's actually a really solid number. And so if you wanted to keep it safer, not, we can round that out to 2,900. Let me try this. Let me just drop it down to 47 even. There you go. With 47 grains of N540 and being pretty safe in your pressures, you're still getting 2,900 feet per second. That's a really solid velocity. So what we're trying to do is show that you can actually push a 308 as a really good overall projectile. And because this is a really well-constructed bullet, I'm going to say this. Within 300 yards, you're not going to have any problem on even elk with this kind of a load. Now, for myself, I'm in my 270, I'm getting about 2,950 feet per second. So we're going to use that 2,900 feet per second and mine at 2,950. Again, there's more powder volume in the 270, so, again, we're keeping it as similar as we can. So I'm going to pull up the Federal Ballistic app, and we're going to go with a hand load. We're going to switch this up. These are both going to be 150 grain. And we're going to start with the 308. So here it is at 2,900 feet per second. And it's 0.435. I don't have to change anything else. It's just doing basic calculations. 10-mile-an-hour cross breeze, 100-yard increment, based upon the elevation that I am, which is 5,000 feet. And 500-yard max. And I'm just doing everything in inches, so just for simplicity. So we calculate this out. And so with a 200-yard zero, it's It's actually a pretty flat trajectory. I can't complain about this at all. You're only 1.4 inches high at 100. So you're still well within your kill zone. 300 yards is virtually a point blank type situation. You don't only have to hold a little high at 300 yards. There we go. Zoom in a little bit, makes it a little easier to read all this. So with that, at 200 yards, you're still maintaining 2551 feet per second and over 2,100 foot-pounds. That's pretty solid. That is definitely ethical. You can take a lot of game with this, even out to 400 yards. Look at your drop. It's only 19.5 inches of drop and 10.4 inches of wind drift in a 10-mile-an-hour wind. You're still over 2,200 feet per second, and you have still over 1,600 foot-pounds. I wouldn't use this past the 500, and it has to do with hitting those velocities and those energies. But this still isn't terrible. You have 39.4 inches of drop, 16.8 inches of wind drift. You're still, not far below 2,100, so 2,074 and 1,433. So energy's a little borderline. I like to stick with the old school, around roughly 1,500 foot-pounds. So even on an elk, on a good-sized cow, this has the potential to do a good job if you are an adequate shooter. I'm going to say that again. If you are an adequate shooter, you can't just be flinging these out there, okay? Because it is a little slower and it's not maintaining all that much energy. But it is also a bonded bullet, so it's going to sink through. So it has the potential to do a great job. So we're going to get rid of this. And we're going to switch out the numbers up here again. Same thing. We're going to 150 grain bullet. Except we're doing 2950. And your BC, it is considerably higher. 0.591. And we're going to pull this up. So here's where you're going to start seeing the difference. So at 200 yards, you're not talking about a significant difference. Instead of a wind drift of 2.5 inches, it's only 1.8. But that's not enough to matter. You're maintaining a considerably higher velocity. Instead of the 2551, you're talking about 2687. So you're talking a difference of 130 feet per second difference. That higher BC bullet of the 270 is going to be holding up. And this is where you're really going to start seeing it open up. So at 500 yards, you got 34.3 inches of drop, 11.4 inches of drift. So you're talking about 5 inches of difference in elevation at 500 yards. Now, for the guys who are talking about dialing, I get it. It's not that much. But as a natural trajectory, this is considerably flatter. 11.4 inches of drift. I forget what the wind drift on the 308 was, but it was more. I think it was like between 16 and 18 inches of drift. Let me type that back in here in a second. I don't want to give you the wrong number. But that's got less drift than the 308. You're still over 2,300 feet per second as opposed to in the 2000s. So you're talking somewhere in about 250 feet per second faster at 500 yards. That's a big difference. Okay? That's a big difference. And this is with the same weight bullet. Again, we're talking the same weight bullets, okay? And you have 1793 as opposed to 1433. So 360 foot-pounds of energy more. Yeah, and it's easy to say, well, it's only a 50 foot per second difference between the 308 and the 270 to start off with. Not when you start getting out to, or should say feet per second. Yeah, but by the time you get out to here, you're talking 250 feet per second faster. So it makes a big difference. And your energy, so what that's going to turn into with those numbers is better penetration at longer range. So again, I'm not knocking the 308. And you can make the argument that I'm not using the right bullet. There's the 168 grain Nosler AccuBond long range. Yeah, but that's also 18 grains heavier, which means you're not going to be able to drive it out of the 308 as fast as you can this. And that's what I'm trying to do. It's also keeping the same weights and everything else the same. I'm trying to make this as even as I can, but again, it's kind of a difficult thing when you're talking such a vastly different caliber. So let me pull that back up with the other one. So we're going to focus on that. So we have 34.3 inches of drop and 11.4 inches of drift, 2320 feet per second, 1793. So let me pull back up the 308. And again, I'm not knocking the 308. I'm not saying it's a bad cartridge. I'm just explaining what has convinced me. So I wasn't far off. So instead of the 34.3, it's 39.4. So 5.1 inches of elevation difference. It's like that. So it's actually a significant difference in your elevation. 16.8 inches of drift. So we're going to round it and say 17. And we had 11.4, so we'll say 11.5. So 11.5 inches opposed to 17. So 5.5 inches of drift difference. That's a big deal. That's a significant change from being right in the kill zone to gut shooting the animal or barely clipping the chest. Like, I'm not talking about the chest. I'm talking about like the brisket area. So that can make a big difference as opposed to where that bullet lands. As opposed to the 2320, you got 2074. So again, about the 250 feet per second difference. And instead of the 1790 and change, you got 1433. So yeah, you have a significant change in your... So again, I'm not saying anything negative about the 308. It is a great cartridge. It has been used all over the world. It has been successful. But when you're talking about longer range hunting and shooting, is it as effective as a standard 270? Just no. It's not going to be. It doesn't have the guts to do it. Now, I suppose if you had the rifle built up and you had the right brass and you could push it to the same pressures, sure. All right. I'm not saying it's not there, but here's the thing. When you're sticking with the same weights of bullets, the same length of barrel, and you're sticking within the SAAMI specs allotted, the 308 isn't going to be able to genuinely keep up with the 270 at longer range. It just doesn't have it. Now, I've done videos in the past of comparing the 30-06 to the 270, even pushing it up to the numbers up to 65,000 for both. And the fact is, for slightly longer range hunting and shooting, the 270 with the newer bullets is still holding up really well against those. And again, I'm not saying anything negative about them. It's just, I've gone through the numbers. I've been able to see this, and I appreciate what the 270 has to offer for medium game hunting out in more open terrain. I prefer it. It has less drift, less drop, and hits harder at range. Now, obviously, if you're only hunting within 300 yards, is there going to be enough of a difference to really matter? Obviously not. And I'm not going to sit there and tell you that you should get rid of your 308 and get a 270. No, I would never tell you that. I wouldn't tell you that about your 30-06. I wouldn't tell you that about your 270. Yes, I am developing a new cartridge. And yeah, I would love to be able to get it into the market to where people are buying it and using it. But in no way, shape, or form am I ever going to tell somebody that their grandpa's 30-06, 308, or 270 is no good. Those are the cartridges that have inspired me to do what I'm doing now. Okay? Everything that exists now is standing on the shoulders of 5 main cartridges. And I'm going to list them. It is, in this order, 30-06, 308, 270 Winchester, 7 Rem Mag, and 300 Win Mag. Not because one's better than the other. Just those. Everything else. And somebody's going to say, well, what about the 243? What about this? 243 is a derivative of the 308. 7mm 08, also a derivative of the 308. Anything short action in those standard size cartridges is a derivative of the 308. Just accept it. So that's why there's no need to go and list everything. But everything in terms of, so you have the 30-06, which kind of owes its existence to the 7x57. That's its own thing. The 300 Win Mag and the 7 Rem Mag owe their existence to the 375 H&H. So there's that. But at the same time, we're not gonna go and list everything because we can't. But everything modern, if you look at the shoulder angles on 7 Rem Mag and 300 Win Mag, they modernized utilizing slightly sharper shoulders compared to older cartridges like the 30-06 and the 270. 25-06, also derivative. But it's the 25-06 never achieved the same status as the other two. As good as it is, it's never achieved the same status. 280 Remington and even the 280 Ackley, they're derivatives of the 30-06 and have never achieved the same status. So while they're really good, they've never achieved the same status of 30-06 and 270. And really, you think about it, the 270s was driven the whole chase anyway. If you think about what Hornady did, the cartridge, they designed 2 cartridges to go after the 270 Winchester. 6.5 Creedmoor and 6.5 PRC. And neither one has upended the 270. It's been around for 100 years. It's been successful. It's popular. It's fairly affordable. It's common. You can find it just about anywhere. So, and the same thing applies to 308 and 30-06. There's a reason why the top 5 is still the top 5. Everything else owes its existence to those cartridges. End of story. So that's what I have for tonight. Please like, subscribe, share, comment. And you can share this. And, if you want to bother somebody who's apparently offended by facial hair, go ahead and share it with them. All right. We'll talk to you again.